Hello, my crafty friends. It's Andrea from Prairie Sky Paper Crafts, your independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator in Manitoba. Today we are coloring. I've had a couple of people ask me questions, excuse me, about using the watercolor pencils, which is one of my favorite coloring mediums. I think they used to be in top spot, but they've taken kind of a second place to the Stampin' Blends. But I really do love the shading and color that you get with the colored pencils. So I'm actually going to show you a few different ways that you can blend your colored pencils. I mean, you can absolutely just color it like you would a traditional coloring pencil, but these are watercolor so that they do blend with water. I've got Rich Raspberry, Pacific Point, Daffodil Delight, Calypso Coral, and Early Espresso that we're going to be playing with. And I've already stamped off our lady from the In the Moment stamp set. Now, because I am using water-based for this, and exclusively water-based for this, I am going to be using Stays On. So I've already stamped them. They're good and dry, ready to go. So we're going to start with, I think, this one. So I'm just going to bring in my Daffodil Delight, and she's going to have a lovely sunny hat. Now, with the pencils, I don't generally get too worried if I've got white showing through, because when we go to blend it, that'll all be taken care of. So her hat is done. Rich Raspberry is going to be her wine. Now I'm going to use the same color throughout so that you can kind of get an idea of what each of these is going to look like. So you can see I'm not being too worried about the white showing through. I'm going to leave the belt white. I'm going to do a little bit heavier where the creases of her dress are. And then just kind of fill in a little bit lighter on the bottom, I think. And I'm just using the regular basic white. Actually, that's a video that I could do for another day. You can also achieve different looks by changing up the paper that you use. So this is just basic white. For her skin, I'm using Calypso Coral. That's the one that I find I get the best results with for Caucasian skin. And then Early Espresso. Just a quick little hit for our deck railing. I'm going to do a little bit darker on top. Oops. It's one thing about dropping pencils on your paper. They don't really tend to leave the same amount of marks as dropping a marker or an ink pad will. Now I'm just going to go ahead and color everybody the same. And then we're going to go back and do our blending. So I'm trying to get roughly the same amount of coverage on each of these for each of our mediums that we're going to use. But as I was saying, depending on the paper that you're using, you can also get different looks. So watercolor paper is going to look a little bit different than just the basic white. And even the basic white thick is going to look a little bit different than the plain basic white. Now, one thing that you do need to be mindful of when you're using any water-based medium, not so much on the watercolor paper because that's what it's built for. It's got a different weave. Is weave the right word for paper? I'm not even sure. Anyway, the texture is different. So it's built and it's thicker so that it'll absorb the water. But with the basic white, you do need to be a little bit careful of how much water that you're putting on it, because it will waffle the paper. And it will also start to pill with too much. That's my experience anyway with the water or the blender pencil. So you can go over it a few times, but you don't want to be too terribly crazy with it. And one of these blending methods I just learned the other day, not gonna lie, totally blew my mind. I'm gonna go up a little bit closer to her hair with this one. And I do like to try to keep my pencil moving in roughly the same direction. Didn't really do that on the first one. But again, with the blending, it's not that big of a deal, because all of these marks and lines will eventually be hidden. I do love coloring, but in all honesty, I prefer quick coloring than super intricate, precise coloring. Mostly because I'm never really 100% sure when people are going to come into my space and need my attention. Okay, so I'm going to do this one a little bit darker, just to kind of more match how I did our first one, so we can get a bit more of an accurate representation of how these are going to work. Okay, so our first one, I'm going to use our regular blending pen. Now, I will give you my best advice for this one. When you're finished blending, you are going to want to make sure that you rub off onto a scrap piece of paper so that the color that you were just working on isn't going to transfer over. So this is just working with the Calypso Coral. Some of the colors, I find particularly the red tones, need a little bit of extra when you're going over it, just to get a really good blend. Sorry, just paying a little bit closer attention here. And sometimes if I'm doing similar color families, like if I've got a bunch of blues or whatever, and it's an area that I want it to kind of go all together, I will keep the same color and not wipe off. So if I had a couple of shades of blue that I wanted to use, I would absolutely do that. I forgot to color her hair, but it's all good. We'll say that she's salt and pepper for this one. So yeah, I wouldn't take the blue and then just apply it directly to another color, because that just wouldn't look right. And generally when I am coloring, I like to do circles. That's how I was taught when I was first learning how to do alcohol markers. And it really does hide the stroke marks. So I find doing that with the blends as well, and even the watercolor pencils, really helps kind of keep it so that you can see more of, I guess, the fabric of what you're creating, and not quite so much of the method that you colored. All right, so there's our girl colored first with our blend. The second thing that we're going to try is I'm going to move these guys out of the way. We're going to use our water painter. So water painter, I always have a piece of paper towel or tissue by my desk, and make sure that it's nice and sealed. I've already done a little bit of a tester on some blues, just right here, to make sure that I had some ink or water flow going. So, and I like to prime it off to the side as well. And you're going to do the same thing. Every time you change your ink or pencil color, you're going to move it over and just kind of brush it off just to make sure that it's going to do exactly what you want. Now, when you're using water, you want to be a little bit more careful how close to the edges that you get, just because it's more fluid than the blender pen, which is a little bit more contained, and it will seep the edges just a little bit more. Now, the reason that we're using the StazOn is because it's an alcohol-based ink, or a solvent ink, so it won't bleed as we're applying the water. And then if you get a little bit thick of a water application, you can just dab it off with your tissue or paper towel, or you can just let it dry. If you let it sit, though, there is a chance that it will go ahead and start to bubble the paper. Again, not so much with, not so much with the watercolor paper, but more so with the regular cardstock. Come on, there we go. One of the things too that I love with the watercolor pencils is that you can scribble them onto a scrap piece of paper and then use your water painter to pick it up and apply the color that way as well. So you can see it's a little bit more subdued with applying it this way. But if I did it, I actually didn't color too terribly hard there. But doing it this way, you get a little bit more, let's get some more pigment down there. A little bit more water flow. So as you pick up the color, you can make it a little bit more vivid with this as well. Now, I'm just going to let her dry. You can see on the back as well, there's a little bit of waffling through with the blender pen, a little bit more by using the water because it's absorbing into the fiber of the paper. Now, the last one that I saw, and I actually just learned this week, kind of blew my mind because it never even crossed my mind to use the color lifter for pencils. One of my favorite UK demonstrators, Martin Stone, actually was the one who showed this technique. He's part of the artisan design team for Stampin Up, and it totally blew my mind. Now, you do need to be careful if you're stamping with StazOn, because this is an alcohol-based and this is a solvent. So for this technique, you would want to do your stamping with Memento, because this, and I wasn't thinking and I stamped with StazOn, but it's fine. With the StazOn, you use that for water-based applications. This you use for Memento, you use for alcohol-based applications. So again, you're going to want to do the same thing. Color off your area. But this totally blew my mind this week. And it absorbs quickly. It doesn't have as big of an impact on your paper, especially if you're using just the regular cardstock. Sidetracked as I'm coloring. Coloring is very therapeutic to me, and it's just, I don't know, easy to lose your train of thought. So yeah, the next time I do this, and there will be a next time, because I'm not going to lie, this is actually blowing my mind. So it also kind of extends your ability to use alcohol-based products with non-alcohol-based products. So let's flip it over. So we can see, you can see that the color lifter did kind of bleed through a little bit. Alcohol inks do that. Really doesn't matter though. I'm just going to grab, what is this one? So Saffron. So even when you color with an alcohol ink marker, it is going to bleed through the paper, but you're not going to see the other side. So it really truly doesn't matter. But you can see coloring with all three of these mediums kind of gives your project a little bit of a different look. So it's a little bit more vivid with the blender pen, but you can feel, I don't know if you can see, it does change the texture of the paper a little bit. Watercolor is a little bit more subtle. And then going over it with the blender pen, it doesn't really have the same effect as the water-based does. So you can kind of keep going over it. It'll just make it lighter each time that you do go over it. And then let's just try something here. So the skirt's a little lighter than I wanted it to be. I'm going to go over it again. And it is coloring fairly similar to the first time that I did it. Now, if I went over either one of these, which I'll do in a second to show you, I am still doing circles, but kind of more of an oval circle. And then if I went over these guys, you can see that it's not really having the same impact or coverage on the paper. It's actually going on a little bit lighter. And then if we go over it again with our coloring medium, it will blend the color still, but it also is lifting the paper up just a little bit more, which honestly isn't a big deal. And then we'll just go over with the blender pen. And again, with the water-based medium, you don't want to go over it too many times because it will start to affect the paper and the coverage. But there you have it. So let me know which way was your preferred way, or what way is your, this is coming loose again. Which way is your preferred way to color with the pencils? Have you ever used a Stampin' Blend, traditional water, or the blender pen? I think I'm a convert to the color lifter, mostly because I don't need to use StazOn and I can just use the Memento, but I'm still loyal to my blender pens and I still really do love them. Watercolor absolutely has its place in my heart, but more for background and bigger, splashier looks. It's not my favorite for coloring, but I do love it for picking up color and applying, or even direct from ink pad. I don't have a ink pad on my desk right now because I rearranged and decided that I wasn't going to use a Stampin' Up ink pad. I was just going to use Memento or StazOn today. But you can push your ink down or put it onto a stamp block. Actually, there might be, yep, there's a little bit of color left on here. So if you have ink on a block, or even from your ink pad, with this, you can pick it up and then apply your color that way. That is my preferred way to use the watercolor painters, or the water painters, I should say. But I hope you had some fun with this video. I hope you learned a few things. As always, don't forget to hit subscribe so you're notified every single time a brand new video goes live. And also be sure to register for my newsletter for your weekly hit of creative inspiration. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I appreciate it. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you again really soon.